Bella, are we good to go?
Yes, we're all set.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Today is October 21st. We're meeting earlier than usual. We continue to meet via Zoom webinar, and we'll have that information for how you can join this meeting and the different ways in which you can participate. With that information is on the screen right now. And let us know if you can provide, if you want to provide public comment. We'll call on you to do so. And you can always call for assistance if you want to join the meeting, 406-552-6630. And Bella, if we could get, Dave Strohmeyer will not be joining us today, so I'm sitting in for him as chair. Just wanted you all to know, so you can bear with me here. Bella, if we can get a roll call for attendance, please, that would be great.
Yep, and so Dave Strohmeyer, absent. Mirta Becerra.
Present.
John Enyon.
Present.
Don MacArthur.
Present.
Debbie Johnston.
Present.
Lucia Oliveira. Josh Slotnick. Dave, oh, I got Dave. Bob Boson.
Present.
And Tung Pham. All right, that's everybody.
Okay, thank you. And we have minutes to approve from our August 17th meeting. Are there any changes to those minutes? Okay, seeing none, those will be approved. And let's quickly look at who we have from the public. No one from the public is joining us to provide public comment today. So with that, we'll move to our first item on the agenda, and that is a presentation on the Reserve Street Community Input Final Report by John Sand. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Mirta. Good morning, everyone. John Sand here with the Missoula Metropolitan Planning Organization. Here today to kind of do a final wrap up of our work we kicked off in early 2020 on the Reserve Street Community Input Project. I have a quick PowerPoint that I'm gonna go through, but I'd like to start us off with a video that is available on our website, MissoulaMPO.com. This was the video we shared with the public in August as our kind of wrap up opportunity public engagement for this phase of the community input project. So I'm going to share my screen and let me know if you do not hear audio.
Welcome to the Reserve Street Community Input Project presentation. On January 29, 2020, the Missoula Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO, partnered with Fifth House Consulting with the purpose of understanding Missoulians' lived experience of Reserve Street and what they believe would improve this experience. Then Fifth House Consulting took your questions and recommendations and took a deeper dive by interviewing key community members and city, county, and state staff who gave input on the proposed recommendations we will be sharing. First, let's review. What is Reserve Street? Reserve Street is a federal highway and a core route in Missoula's transportation network. It's heavily traveled by local commuters, visitors, and people shopping from surrounding counties. Reserve Street is a regional economic center, which adds to the daily congestion. Vehicle counts vary from 38,000 to 43,000 a day. Now let's review who uses Reserve Street. We have cyclists, shoppers, farmers, people with disabilities, commuters, and people that pass through traveling. The MPO cares about them all. The goal of this project was to gather community input to aid in the planning of the Long-Range Transportation Plan. LRTP is a multimodal transportation plan, updated every 4 years, that considers the growth and development of a regional transportation system. It's important to note that this is a long-term plan, and, like all changes to city infrastructure, will take time to implement. This graphic shows the 4 overarching stages of decision-making during the development process for creating a public space. Community input is vital at each step. Together, MPO and Fifth House Consulting collected feedback from the community to initiate Step 1, planning. We used a variety of methods to gather diverse perspectives and insights from Missoulians, elected officials, and agency staff. This was done through 2 public surveys, a community forum, interviews with key community members and city, county, and state staff, and case studies with individual Missoulians. Many commented on the good aspects of Reserve Street. Some liked that parts of Reserve Street were still quite rural. Some talked about how convenient local store access was. Their concerns were primarily heavy trafficking and congestion, road rage or unsafe driving habits, and a general perception that the industrial sections of Reserve Street are ugly and are not the best face to put forward to tourists coming into town. After 9 months of gathering information, recommendations were broken up into 3 categories: shorter-term planning recommendations the MPO can look into, long-term planning recommendations for the MPO, and recommendations that the everyday Missoulian can do to help. Here are some areas the MPO is already working on, as well as some areas they can look into to improve the quality of the user's experience on Reserve Street. Update signal technology to optimize the flow of traffic. One of the ways the MPO and MDT are looking at traffic and congestion is through signal optimization and new technology, often referred to as Intelligent Traffic Signals, or ITS. A recent study by MDT, funded through a Federal Accelerating Innovation Deployment, or AID grant, examined the traffic operations of 2 corridors in Missoula, Reserve Street and Brooks. The results of that study indicated some potential for improved traffic flow through signal timing optimization and other new technologies designed to respond to changes in traffic patterns. However, the corridor also has some issues and constraints, including queue lengths, cross-street signal needs for both traffic and longer pedestrian crossing times, lane configuration imbalances, and left turn timings. Work to facilitate updates to local transit service, like the Mountain Line, to decrease vehicle congestion. Currently, Mountain Line services Reserve Street behind the big box stores. This is the safest and most efficient way to provide public transport at present. Should future transformations reimagine Reserve Street, the MPO and Mountain Line will continue to work together to decrease vehicle congestion. Create safe pedestrian road crossings and design pedestrian-friendly sidewalks to allow for more foot traffic, and design protected bicycle facilities. Provide incentive for efficient transportation modes like walking or biking, and build a grid system by creating alternative routes that connect side streets to major arteries. This can help spread the congestion out. For instance, one of the primary goals of the Russell Street project is to reduce pressure on Reserve Street through increased capacity on an alternate route. While the project is still new and not fully constructed, early evidence indicates that some traffic is choosing Russell Street over Reserve Street. Focus on the beautification of Reserve Street. Investments in some more modern, water-wise, and low-maintenance type of landscaping would make this area fit in with the feel of Missoula. Relatively low-cost improvements can significantly transform the way a street looks, which can then transform the way people feel. For example, trees and flowers, along with attractive signage and flags, help people feel proud, positive, and calm. And continue to keep community members involved to remain in touch with the greater desires of the Missoulian citizens. When making these recommendations, we acknowledge that changes to Reserve Street will call for multi-jurisdictional coordination. Decision-making for this route isn't left only to MDT, the city, or county, but instead requires a complex relationship among all of those jurisdictions. The MPO's role is to ensure coordinated and comprehensive planning for solutions within this partnership. Now it's your turn to learn what you can do to help. First, stay aware, informed, and contribute. Continue to show up, keep in mind that these things take time, and remember that it's your input that will create the framework for change. Institute a positive culture framework. This means trying to notice the positive. When do things go well? How can you pay attention to the positive social norms? Try to take note of what does work for the community. Don't be a distracted driver and remind others to not be distracted. Ask yourself, can this call or text wait? Encourage yourself and those around you to practice patience and focus when they're behind the wheel. Be proactive about safety. We all want Reserve Street to be safe. Ask yourself, what does it mean for me to be a safe driver? What does it mean to be looking out for not just my safety, but your safety? Another example would be, I wear a seatbelt, and I would ask that you wear a seatbelt. Or, I do not text and drive, so I would ask that you do not text and drive. We can all adopt the mindset, it's not just my safety, but our safety. And remember, be kind. We all have the same goals. Thanks to you, Reserve Street will become a safer, less congested, and more beautiful part of Missoulians' daily life. Remember to stay engaged and informed.
All right, thank you. I'm going to switch screens real quick. 1 second. So that video was something we, like I said, this whole project kicked off about 2 months before the pandemic stay-at-home order. So the video that that I just showed you was another type of media to just try to get the word out about this process and share the findings from this report with the community. So kind of fun to have a video, really quick watch for folks to get an idea of what we did and what we learned. So feel free to share that YouTube link. So yeah, got the video covered. Like we mentioned in the video, we had a community input forum in January of 2020. That was very successful, pretty cool format to the whole thing. We had learning and sharing stations that you can see in this picture. So folks had the opportunity to learn about traffic safety on the Reserve Street corridor, plans for Reserve Street, and how all this ties in together with land use. After that was when everyone started working from home. We were planning on doing in-person focus groups, so we adjusted the process with this Reserve Street community input project to include stakeholder interviews, key informant interviews, and those occurred during the 2020 and early 2021.
John, we have a question from Debbie. Would you mind taking that now?
I just wasn't sure, John, if you were sharing screens.
I thought I was. Sorry.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what you said. I'm going to switch screens, but and then that came up. So thank you.
I'm sorry about that.
There
Can
we
you see
go.
that now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Appreciate that. There we go. Now you can see the pictures.
Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Now you can see the pictures of the learning and sharing stations. So we had Andrew Hagemeyer from the county, Dave Gray on our team, and Aaron Wilson facilitating the learning stations. And then a really fun and unique part of this process was having the community members share their experiences, interpretation of what's happening on Reserve Street today. So you can take a look at this very cool graphic that was done while during the meeting, while people were facilitators were asking folks about about their observations on Reserve Street today. So you can see unfriendly, congested. Folks are interested in alternatives to Reserve Street. Yeah, so this graphic is also on our website, and just kind of an idea of what communities members' perspective is of their experience on Reserve Street today. And then the other sharing station for community members was how they imagine Reserve Street in the future. So little different vibe to this graphic. You can see everything from solar panels to gondolas, roundabouts, coordinated stoplights, which was mentioned in that video, which is ITS, Intelligent Traffic Services, So it was really fun to hear from community members of how they envision Reserve Street being their experience of Reserve Street in the future. Like I said, everything from lighting to mixed use, land use came up a lot in this as well, as safety. And this graphic was also in the video that we shared with folks to try to give them a visual understanding of the planning process. And so really this graphic could be applied to any type of planning process that we do. And then there are opportunities for the public to be involved. So you can see throughout the process, there are opportunities to, for the public input. And so this was something we also shared during the forum, just part of that learning and sharing and making sure folks have a good understanding that we are listening to them and during various parts of the planning process. And like I said, just a really nice graphic visual representation of the planning process. A big part of this project was after stakeholder interviews, key informant interviews, user group interviews, was coming up with next steps and recommendations for the corridor. And this includes everything from MPO tasks, short-term, long-term, and then also recommendations for the community, such as continuing to stay involved, provide public comment, the distracted driver, and the institute a positive cultural framework, which is kind of the concept of Reserve Street isn't all that bad. I just got back from Seattle, Washington last night. Traffic on Reserve Street, it's all relative, and so keeping in mind that kind of what you put out there is what you get back. So yeah, pretty good list of next steps and recommendations for all of us and the community. And with that, that is our presentation. Erin might have some more to add, but I wanted to open it up for questions and comments.
Thanks, John. Are there any questions from committee members or any comments?
Mirta, I'd love to ask one if I could.
Yeah, and for the record, please note that Mr. Pham and Commissioner Slotnick are present.
Thanks.
Hey, Josh.
So John, what would it take to get those signals coordinated?
That's something that I will let Erin answer.
Yeah, well, first is coordination with MDT, and we've been having some discussions. I know I guess it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we had a presentation on the aid grant research that MDT was doing on potential opportunities for signal optimization and different kinds of technology like detection and real-time signal timing changes. And so my understanding is that there hasn't been a ton of capacity to move that forward over the last couple of years, but I think there's renewed interest and an idea to try to get that up and running again. So hopefully we can have some details in the near future about that. We've also talked about traffic signal timing and those technologies as being an important priority for potential use of our CMAQ funds. So we're also talking about how we might leverage our available CMAQ funding to tie into anything that MDT is doing along those fronts, sort of citywide. So all that to say that nothing immediate to report now, but there's a lot of efforts on that front. And I think it's something we can hopefully tackle. It'll take more than a year, but something in the very near future that we can start working on that.
Thanks, Erin. Dawn, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. On that topic. Don and I have been sitting on TPCC when dinosaurs were the primary form of transportation, and Josh, there are varying levels of sophistication around that signal timing. There's kind of basic stuff. And it's what we employ fairly regularly, right? We do some analysis and then we tweak the timing, particularly as you look at corridors like Higgins and Broadway. There are now levels of sophistication around, really active real-time signal optimization. And I want to say, and Aaron, you may remember this, but I want to say, and Mirta, you may remember it as well when you're on staff, is I want to say there was an $11 million project, give or take, that got us pretty far down the road in terms of optimization. And I recall from those conversations that the stuff that was happening in real time was really effective. And also, the more idle time we have out there, the more greenhouse gas emissions we have. So I think there are a lot of reasons to consider that, and maybe we could have a conversation in TPCC about MDT's appetite for some of that, particularly given the fact that some money has rained upon the state. It might be an opportunity to take on some projects that would have languished but for lack of resource. But for resource rather.
Yeah, thanks for that. Don MacArthur.
Thanks, Mirta. Maybe this is a question for you, Aaron. But it seems like often we are developing plans in response to requirements in terms of long-range transportation plans, et cetera. This plan seems a little bit more like we just generated it as a community. This is an area that we think needs some thought. And I guess a couple questions. One, after doing it, does it feel like that was the right level to take the project on? And do you feel like it now has that the output from it is enough to sort of inform our documents, long-range transportation plan, our grant applications, as Mayor Engen suggested, maybe starts to suggest how we might access some of the money that's coming in stimulus form. So I guess I'm just sort of, as a larger way of sort of long-range transportation planning, did this feel effective? And what did you learn?
That's a really good question. We went into this as if you'll remember, as a not so much a planning process that we typically undertake, where we've identified a problem, we're going through alternatives, and we come up with a solution, and then we're moving on to funding. This was much more of a process designed to engage with the community a little bit and try to better understand the dynamics of Reserve Street. How are people experiencing it today? What do they want it to do for them? To really understand that context, so that when we are designing solutions, we're not making assumptions about how people are using Reserve Street or what they want it to be, and to really dive deeper on that. And I think there was some hope coming out of this that we'd have some directions that we could go on actions, like what are next things that we can do, or what are some ways that we can continue to engage the public on Reserve Street, knowing that it's a really challenging corridor. So it looks like Rachel just joined us, so she can dive into that more, but not to put you on the spot right now, Rachel. But I think we learned a number of things. One, we learned some more in-depth view of Reserve Street, that people aren't just driving it to get from one end to another, and that really came out of some of those conversations. One, the forum was a really effective way to engage people around something like Reserve Street. I feel like it was one of the better, if not the best, I think, public engagement activities we've done, where it's a situation where it could easily have been people coming into the room just angry about Reserve Street and asking us why we're not doing anything. And we tried to pair some educational opportunities with the feedback we were getting. So as people were going through the different stations, we were providing some education and then having conversations about their concerns or their interests or what they were wanting to do. And so that was a really valuable experience, I think, just to engage people. They felt like they were learning about how our processes work, and the outcomes as we were going through it. And so that was, in and of itself, I think, a really valuable experience to go through that, and having Rachel's assistance to design something like that was really effective. And then with this final report, because we know more and we've had those conversations and thinking a little bit more about what the role of Reserve Street is in Missoula, we can then apply that to things like the long-range transportation plan, where we were looking at that area of North Reserve and North Reserve Scott Street and some of the potential projects that we could invest in, and how do those meet those needs that people are saying, whether it's, I use Reserve Street to go shopping and I do all of my shopping in that area and it's really effective for that, but it's hard to get across, or I have to drive from store to store, or there isn't the right connectivity off of Reserve Street to access those things, so I have to get onto it. Those kinds of contexts were helpful as we were developing recommendations in the long-range transportation plan. And then I think the last piece, in terms of what the public can do, I thought we had some really good recommendations in the report of, it's not all just about building infrastructure. There are things like the positive cultural framework that is really focused about how we're talking about Reserve Street and thinking about it. It's not just that it's this terrible road that's congested and everyone hates it, that there are ways to think about Reserve Street where it is providing functions, like it's a highway that's moving through a lot of people through Missoula. It's also one of our biggest commercial corridors. It's a primary commuter corridor. It's doing all of those things. And if, some congestion is the worst thing that we have, not to say that isn't impacting people's lives and it's important, but you're sort of ignoring all of the things that it does maybe really well when you're talking about that. So that's one piece, giving some people things to talk about and ways to reflect on Reserve Street. And then just, thinking about those campaigns about people's own behavior, like distracted driving, or yes, you're in congestion, but that doesn't mean you should be acting in ways that are creating risk for everyone else, like, road rage or whatever else there might be there. So I think some of those, and then discovering that, people really had interests around things like beautification of Reserve Street. So what can we do and how can we engage people in try to tackle some of those things and stuff that might be peripheral to the infrastructure, and how can we focus on some of those elements that maybe are going to be easier to address than some of the congestion issues that are really just sort of those sticky, wicked problems that don't have easy solutions. So I guess that's a long rambling answer, Don, that hopefully covered some of what you were hoping to get out of it.
That was, I covered most of the things. Maybe the sort of nubbin of it was, how do we, take that public input and engage it into real projects? And we all know that transportation world is slow moving, and it takes I guess really the question is, how do we take the input we got and turn it into actionable projects? And that's I guess I'm wondering what the next step is that guarantees that this energy gets harnessed into identified projects that then go into the queue.
I'll let Rachel answer that one.
Yeah, so Don, I think there were actually some very feasible things that could be done that would feel like we were moving towards. So we know that structural components take time, right? That's something that we have to wait on. But what we're talking about, when there was not just a few people that said, we want the beautification of Reserve Street to be something we're interested. There was a large group that said, we do not want Reserve Street to be what people think of as Missoula, Montana when they come through it, or that when we go there. And there is research that shows that when we beautify an area, it actually calms people. I mean, so there's multiple benefits to looking at, do we put flags up, like kind of like the way the downtown looks, right? We started hanging flowers. We started putting flags up. We have wayfinding. So there are concrete steps that we could be taking to make this a more pleasant experience for people, which we do know lowers their road rage, has them feeling a little bit more ownership and pride. We could even get businesses involved in that to take part in that. The other components of steps that we really could do, and again, we looked at the crash data, and the majority of the crashes were rear end type of accidents on Reserve Street. Now, Dave, who does do all the safety and crash information, said it's challenging for us to directly say that that has to do with distracted driving. But one thing that we do know is that usually when somebody gets rear-ended, somebody's not paying attention for whatever reason. So some steps that we could do, we do have a distracted driving campaign. We have a prevention specialist in our county that works on this. We could be working on that. And if we reduce crashes and we start educating people about when you are in this congested area, pay attention, be thoughtful, don't answer your phone. You have a responsibility. We asked a question on the surveys that we did, which was, do you think that you are a good driver on Reserve Street? And everybody said yes. And then we asked kind of a question about, what is the problem with Reserve Street and driving? And they said, well, other people are bad drivers. So there are things that we could do right now that would be responsive to what people want. It might seem roundabout, but what they want is they do not want as many crashes. They want the road to be more enjoyable. They want it to be something that they can get through and get out of there. And so we can do that. So those are some of the smaller things. And I thought that that was one of the interesting component about doing this project, is that we didn't come up with those solutions per se. They came up with those solutions. And the solutions were in what it is that they were saying, this kind of experience that they would want to have there.
Thanks, Rachel. That's I attended one or two of the community forums, and I have to say that it felt like a two-way communication, two-way information. I think that meeting kind of set the parameters for what can happen and it's absolutely outside of our realm of possibilities. And I think that was a really good starting point for a lot of the conversations that came after. I think people knowing, we're not going to add more lanes. No, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. But here's what we could do. I think that was hugely beneficial to the conversations that took place after. So I see Debbie and then Bob. Go ahead, Debbie.
Thanks. Dawn's follow-up was my question, but I'm going to have a follow-up to that. The first is a technical question, probably, Aaron, for you. I just wanted to know if the signal timing now is set to maximum green on Reserve.
Gosh, I don't know the answer. I suspect that there is a higher priority. Well, I know that there's a higher priority to Reserve Street. And I don't know. It's been a really long time since we've had at least citywide signal timing optimization. And so there have been some tweaks here and there on specific projects or in relation to specific issues. But typically on a street like Reserve Street, the priority would be for Reserve Street. And I think that's one of the factors that often gets overlooked when we start talking about signal optimization is, what are you optimizing for? Is it for throughput on Reserve Street? Is it for traffic on the side street? How are you optimizing or is it for pedestrian, making sure pedestrians have sufficient time to get across the street? There's a number of ways you can optimize signal timing, not all of which are just maximum throughput for one street. So that's, I think, an important point that's, there's no right answer to that. It's just more about your goals, and reports like this, I think, are helpful for looking at that. Like what is the priority for people?
Okay. And then just to follow up, because I was going to ask about, the next steps, like what are the next steps? So Rachel, you spoke to that, but what I wondered about was the timeline for implementation of some of these ideas.
Yeah, I don't know that a lot of them aren't necessarily timelined. I think we're going to have to coordinate on any infrastructure projects. We have to coordinate through available funding, work with MDT to see what projects and funding they have coming up. As far as the campaigns go, I think that, again, that's another one where we would want to coordinate with the county and the other, like, distracted driving campaigns. It's certainly part of our community transportation safety plan. So, and then just continued engagement with the community around Reserve Street. I think there's still a focus group of folks who are interested in improving it and doing something, and they're meeting semi-regularly, and we can continue to engage with them and try to find out where they fall into it. I guess I don't know that any of these are our highest priorities of projects, so I don't know that we would start on any of them tomorrow, but I think that as we start to talk about our work plans through, like, the UPWP and things, if some of these are high enough priority, we should add that into our staff time as we start thinking about the upcoming fiscal years.
Thanks. Bob, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. A couple things, Aaron, to your point about projects. I will remind the group that, it is part of the NH system in Missoula District. I currently have somewhere in a neighborhood of $150 to $200 million worth of unfunded projects that are on the docket that I've got to find a funding source before I program any additional projects. So that's just a little dose of reality right there. The funding challenge is immense. John, you got to fill me in a little bit more about the extra money, because the extra money from the transportation bill that we're seeing. The reality is, for the Missoula District, amounts to $8 million a year spread over 3 funding categories: interstate, national highways, and primary systems. So I'm picking up almost enough to cover inflation from when they had the last project or the last funding program 6 years ago.
I continue to have high hopes for Build Back Better, Bob.
Yeah, me too. But that's the last time we took a look at the bill that's in front of them right now would amount to about $8 million a year for our district, like I said, and that has to be spread across 3 categories. So NH would get somewhere in the neighborhood of probably $2 million a year. So that's a lot of years to solve my $200 million backlog.
Fair enough.
And then I did have a question on the study, and I guess the big question that I have is, I know there was a lot of community outreach, but I'd like to hear more about what the community was that outreach was done to. Was that the city, the MPO, or did we actually reach out to the trucking industry, the logging industry? Idaho uses that as the route to get to I-90. I want to make sure that we're actually finding out what all the users of it are, not just those users in Missoula and those users within the MPO boundaries, because I feel like a broken record. I just repeated the same thing in a discussion with Whitefish a few weeks ago and Polson last week, and that's these national highway routes. You can hop on Highway 93 at Canada and end up in Mexico and never pull off. It is truly an international route. So it serves the community that it serves includes Mexico and Canada. And we need to make sure that we're cognizant of that as well, because those, the users, the funding that we get for the national highway system, 87% of it is not Montana dollars.
It's a good point. And I would say we didn't quite make it to Canada or Mexico in our outreach, but maybe we can add that to our aspiration. We'll take a trip down there, Bob, and talk to some folks. But no, it's a good point. And I think this project report is more focused on sort of local users' experiences of and interests in Reserve Street, and any projects that come out of this are going to have to balance that broader national need for routes like Highway 93. And so again, I don't think this study is saying we should do X, Y, and Z projects necessarily, but I think it's offering us some insight as we start to develop those projects, how we can do them in a way that improves the experience for people who are here using it every day.
Because I will tell you that I receive a lot of calls and emails and concerns about Reserve Street. And by a long shot, the minority of them come from city residents. They come from users from Lake and Flathead County, users from Bitterroot County. Out of state folks are asking me what's going on. I don't know if that's just acceptance by Missoula residents or if you're getting all of them at the city level, but they aren't reaching out to MDT a lot about it.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
Next I see Don and then Josh have questions.
Yeah, after Bob crushed our dreams of any significant financing, I guess maybe I think a couple comments. One is that a number of the things that came out of the report don't exactly seem like they're just in the transportation arena. The beautification, for example, there could be other partners involved in that process. And I guess this is where I think that, I had imagined, could there be some action plan of, number one, here's how we might generate financing that would allow us to do ITS or something like that if we think that's our top priority. And number two, who are our partners in these other areas? And I think that one of the things that I liked about this report is that it does sort of broaden. It's not just what can we do with the hammer of transportation funding, but what do we actually need in this corridor? And I just wondered how those other folks that would be partners in that would even know that this happened, and how would we engage them into whatever it might take, some kind of zoning overlays or other things that could actually implement some of the other ideals.
Yeah, that's another really good point. And our next presentation, which when we get there, we'll have to postpone that because Ben Brewer is ended up not available today because of some travel issues. But the next presentation was on the growth policy analysis and update. And I think that is a great place for this report to inform some of that work. Like, what are we doing on the land use side that can help improve that experience in ways that aren't just, building another massive highway or, some of these, like you said, the transportation dollars. And so we're starting to try to make that connection. And now that we have this report, we can share it and we'll be sharing it. And hopefully that will help continue to make the connection. And I think the same is true on the safety side, sort of safety education campaign side, that we can share this and connect with MDT folks who are working on that at a state level or locally, and same with the county. So I think there are good opportunities for, like you said, for those partners, and we'll continue to keep them involved. And we tried to, even from the very beginning with that forum where we had Andrew Hagemeyer from the county who came and helped present the land use side of Reserve Street and talk about that in the context of everything else. And so trying to make those connections for people to help them understand that, there are other avenues for improving this besides just TPCC and the MPO, or calling MDT and asking MDT to fix all those problems. So,
and maybe Aaron, look for the non-traditional or the non-typical partners, because I know that for beautification, for example, Parks and Recreation had a really tough, challenging time trying to keep all the landscaping on Reserve Street. So I think we're going to have to start looking at different ways to achieve that same goal.
Yeah.
go ahead.
Thanks, Mirta. So when Aaron opened up this discussion, he pointed out this was kind of a non-traditional act of transportation planning, given that it wasn't the obvious first step in something that would end in a big infrastructure ask. And I wanted to give a little historical context to this, in part because some of it's my fault, and that I was a new commissioner, and I can answer Bob's question of, well, does it seem like the locals don't care or they're not going to MDT? They waited for a new commissioner and they jumped on that guy. So I was here just a few days and I got hit hard by Reserve Street is terrible. And we are an organized group of folks that came to see me, and we have been to everyone and no one will listen. And I'm not saying that they're true. This is just what they were saying. And something needs to be done. And they were pretty relentless in their pressure. So I went to talk to Aaron, and we had some really good conversations and walks around the block, partly about what could be done, but also partly about, is there a way to take all of that energy that's organized around anger and reorient it towards some type of creating of solutions. And then we brought Rachel in, who's full disclosure, my friend. So I to talk to Rachel about, do you have any experience dealing with, can we take anger and orient it towards solutions? And out of all those conversations came an idea around this type of outreach. And there's a little historical background and where all the angry comments went. They didn't go to MDT. One question I had, it came out of this around beautification. It's not just the right of way. It's those oceans of asphalt that abut their right of way. And all those are pieces of private land. I don't know if anyone out there on this call has had experience attempting to create beauty on someone else's land in what is sort of a public space. But I think that therein lies a challenge and also an opportunity with a whole bunch of partners. Any thoughts on that? I think we could gain a whole lot in improving the quality of the user experience if we were to change those oceans of asphalt into oceans with islands of green. And I'm not saying now Donna's got to take care of it. I'll just leave it at that, see what anybody has to say.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, well, just while folks are thinking or coming up with anything else, I will say one of the ways I saw this project is somewhat effective is that I think we did channel some of that sort of anger and frustration through those first meetings and conversations, and helping people understand the complexities and who's responsible for what, just some of that education while we were listening to what their concerns were. And you could even see it as people sort of went sort of station to station as the evening went on. And I think people were understanding better, and hopefully that helps them be better advocates in the long run, that they understand more. And so, you know, it's a really small piece. It was a snapshot in time, but it's a good model that we can use moving forward, is to think about our engagement and how we bring people along in these. That's maybe not quite so. It's still going to be frustrating because everything takes time and nothing happens overnight. But I think that is helpful. And then
I think you're totally right. It worked in that way, and it wasn't just, oh, here's an opportunity for you to yell. It was, here's an opportunity for you to be creative, and the structure of those kind of listening sessions or information gathering sessions changed the tenor of the conversation. So it wasn't just that they were had; it was how they were designed.
Yeah.
So, any thoughts on beautifying other people's land?
Well, I will say, you know, that often starts with having the conversation in a broader platform, you know, something like a growth policy update or the zoning and the code update that's happening, and having more of a vision. So when redevelopment of those properties does occur, that there's not necessarily an expectation, maybe it's an expectation, but also just a vision for what that could look like. And I think that helps us get there. Not every development is going to do everything that you want, but the more we have that vision established and the tools in place to help get there, I think the closer we'll get. And the more that those things will happen, that development tends to follow that over time, I think is what we typically see.
Yeah, you know, I think it's going to be a multi-pronged approach to this. You know, to some degree, it's going to be by regulation, and so looking at our land uses and zoning, but another one's going to be by volunteer or a more fluid sort of approach, people wanting to do it. Rachel, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think it has to do with this issue. Part of the challenge with Reserve Street is people feel like it happened to them. And how we get people to voluntarily, if they own the land, is to talk with them about how you can be a part of this not happening to you. And I think by saying, here's one thing that we know helps people behave better or care more about the area, and there usually does have to be some kind of incentive, supplemental funding. And I think part of the incentive could be, we know that you're not interested in having speeding traffic or having people not care and litter or have, these kind of different occurrences that happen in front of your property on Reserve Street. So here's a solution that we know has happened in other communities, and it has happened in other communities that they've done beautification of areas. So I think we just have to show them case studies and then ask them to give it a shot. So Josh, I think that's how we get people to do things, is it's that slow one by one going and talking. It's not like I think a quick fix, but I think it does take some effort in communicating, showing people the possibilities, and one by one seeing, I think about that guy who, and I know this is much smaller, so maybe it's not right to talk about, but the gentleman who used to have his stand outside of First Security Bank, of where he sold goods, and then he started planting things on the corner there, and then all these other places, businesses downtown started planting things on their corners, and now we have these beautiful flower kind of arrangements. I mean, that's a very small example, but we do, there are other things and research that Jay Otto, who is at the Center for Health and Safety in MSU Bozeman, talked with me about. So, but Josh, that would be one route.
Great. Any other thoughts or questions about the presentation? Okay.
Well, and maybe just before we wrap up, Mirta, I just want to take a quick second to thank Rachel and all of her work on this project, because it started as we're going to do this in 6 months and be done, and then COVID hit, and it is strung it out much longer than we intended, but she's done a really fantastic job guiding us through this project and helping us on it, and doing some really, I think, creative, innovative ways to engage the public on this question. And I think we've gotten a really good product out of it. That we may continue to struggle with how we implement, but I think the process was really fantastic. And we took something that could have been just an opportunity for people to rant and be angry about something, and turned it into more of a positive product, and has given us a model for how we can engage the public on some of these issues. So just want to really thank Rachel for all her work on this project, and it's been a good one to work through. So
I completely agree. When I went to that community forum, I was a little bit concerned that we were going to have all these people in one room who don't like Reserve Street, who probably had a lot to say about, the city and MDT and everyone. And it turned out like a really good conversation. So that didn't happen by chance. That happened because we had qualified people working with everyone involved. So thank you, Rachel. And Bob, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Rachel's was up before mine, though.
We're gonna ignore her. No.
All right, so I just have one comment about the beautification. Been there, done that type statement. We've done it with a lot of communities. I think many of you know I've worked in 3 different districts in my career with MDT. We've had beautifications in many communities. Just a little bit of cautionary advice. I've been burned a few times where we've agreed. It's really easy to have the bake sales and get the beautification put in place, but long-term, be prepared to have it dumped into your lap to maintain it going forward. And that's where we really struggle. That's why we do have the process. It's not that we don't support it. It's just that we do have a very detailed process to go through to allow beautification and changes. I personally, I really appreciate it. I think it does wonders for the community, but like I say, it's easy to have those bake sales and get the community on board to make the initial changes. But then when those people that are really driving the bus that gets us to that initial change, when they find a new passion and they set the beautification of their main street, their thoroughfare aside, somebody else has to be found to pick it up, or else it's left with the taxpayers again. And we've experienced it in a couple communities down at Bitterroot. We've experienced it in a few communities in the Flathead. We experienced it in communities along the High Line. And at the end of the day, in the past, it all got dumped back on MDT, and it becomes something we're not set up to be gardeners and landscapers. And so it's a pretty burdensome expense that gets stuck on us. So that's why we do have our new policy in place. So one thing I will say is that I really appreciate the city of Missoula and the Missoula County both, and the willingness the community drive here it's really, you guys do set a separate standard than most communities. So I fully appreciate that, but I just wanted to share that has been my experience in a lot of communities across the state. So just kind of going forward, make sure you have that secondary plan.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. And with that, Aaron, do you want to touch base on when we're going to get the next presentation by Ben?
Yeah, and maybe this has worked out really fortuitously because we had good conversation and we can end at noon and not go long. So maybe this all worked out the way it intended to. I'll work with Ben and work. It may be a month or two before we can get that presentation back. Hopefully we can next month. Just depends on what else is on the agenda. But I do think it'll be good conversation for this group to think about the growth policy analysis and updates that are ongoing and how that relates to the work that we do in transportation. We had some really good conversation in TTAC about that. So we'll try to get that back in front of you as soon as possible, but it may depend a little bit on more pressing, time sensitive agenda items. So we'll keep it on there and work with Ben and the scheduling to get that back in front of all of you.
Sounds good. So with that, we don't have any old business, any announcements or closing comments. Okay.
I just have one real quick, Myrta, and that's Aaron, if you can work with Jacqueline. I know that the idea of optimizing signal timing is something that we're always wanting to look at. Signal timing becomes extremely challenging when capacity basically has been met, which is where we are on a lot of those intersections. There's just, if you could figure out a way to get more seconds in a minute, that'd help us, but I don't know how to do that. So
you just have to go faster. If you go fast enough, it's all relative, right? So
yeah. And the other thing I'll share is you want me nowhere near a signal cabinet, because I was allowed in them a couple times. I put 3 minutes of full red when I meant to do 3 minutes of the 3 seconds of full red, and that's a good way to get yelled at, let me tell you.
Yeah, no, I hopefully we can get some more discussions going about signal timing and optimization and what our opportunities are and how we can fund that. So we'll try to get that on the agenda here coming up in the next couple of months or so. Just a couple of quick announcements that we may be able to get some updates to this committee about. MDT is launching an update to the statewide freight plan and the statewide ADA transition plan, and so those both have some upcoming public opportunities that we'll certainly participate in at a staff level, and we can potentially bring those updates to this group as they if it's warranted and there are potential recommendations or impacts to work that we do in Missoula. So we'll keep an eye on those. But if anyone's individually interested, those are all out on MDT's website, and I can certainly send out links to those opportunities if anyone is interested.
Great. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to John and Aaron and everyone on the MPO staff for all your work on this Reserve Street community plan. Thank you. And with that, if there are no more comments, we would stand adjourned. Oh, Bob, go ahead.
I forgot to share that the Transportation Commission did meet this morning and approve the tentative construction plan for the next 5-year cycle. So that's an annual approval, but that was done this morning. So that'll be published shortly. Everybody can take a look at that too.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Well, enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, Bella.